The girl? No one chose. The auctioneer's gavel struck wood like a death sentence. Going once for the orphan girl. His voice carried across the dusty Wyoming yard where 8-year-old Clara Wynne stood trembling on a wooden platform, clutching a faceless rag doll against her chest. Below her, buyers shuffled their boots and looked away. She'd watched 17 children sold before her, each one claimed, wanted, chosen. Now the crowd thinned, men turning toward the horse pens with relief in their eyes. Clara's fingers tightened around her doll's worn cotton body. The auctioneer raised his hammer again. Going twice, her whisper cut through the autumn air like broken glass. No one wants me. Before we begin Clara's journey, I invite you to stay with us until the very end of this story. If it touches your heart, please hit the like button and comment with your city so I can see how far Clara's story travels across the world. Now, let's return to that dusty yard in 1881, where everything was about to change. The September sun beat down on the auction yard outside Cheyenne with the kind of heat that made promises feel like lies. Clara Wynne had learned not to believe in promises 3 foster homes ago, back when she still thought someone might want a skinny girl with tangled brown hair and eyes too old for her face. The platform beneath her feet was splintered pine, worn smooth by the boots of livestock and the bare feet of children just like her. She could smell horse manure and tobacco, sweat and desperation. These were the smells of being unwanted, and Clara knew them by heart. "Folks, we've got one more before we move on to the prime stock," the auctioneer called out, his voice tired. He was a heavy man with a red face and suspenders that dug into his shoulders. He'd been kind to some of the younger children, lifting them gently onto the platform. For Clara, he'd simply pointed. She'd climbed up herself. She kept her eyes fixed on the mountains in the distance, purple shadows against the bright sky. If she looked at the crowd, she'd see their faces, the same expression she'd seen in 3 different parlors when foster families decided she was too quiet, too strange, too damaged from whatever had happened before the orphan train brought her west. Clara Wynne, age 8, the auctioneer read from his paper. Healthy, can read some, knows her letters and numbers, from the Sisters of Mercy, home in Philadelphia. The sisters had been kind enough in their distant way. They'd fed her, clothed her, taught her that children should be seen and not heard. Clara had gotten very good at not being heard. So good that sometimes she wondered if she had disappeared entirely. "She's small for her age," a woman's voice called from the crowd. Mrs. Patterson, who'd taken 2 boys earlier. "Looks sickly." Clara wasn't sickly. She was just small and pale and too thin because the orphanage portions had been meager and she'd learned to give her share to the littler ones, but she didn't say anything. What was the point? "Strong enough for housework," the auctioneer countered, though his heart wasn't in it. "Good with mending and quiet tasks." Quiet tasks. Clara almost smiled. That's what they called it when a child had learned to make herself invisible. The crowd was already moving, men drifting toward the horse pens where the real business of the day waited. Women gathered their chosen children close, already planning where to place their new workers: kitchen, garden, nursery. Clara recognized the calculations in their eyes. She'd seen them before. "Do I hear an opening bid?" The auctioneer's voice carried less conviction now. "Folks, this is a good girl, obedient, won't cause trouble." Silence stretched across the yard like a held breath. Clara's fingers worked against the rag doll's body, finding the seam where the stuffing had started to leak out. She'd carried this doll for 3 years since a sister at the orphanage had given it to her on her 6th birthday. It had no face, the thread features had worn away, but Clara liked it better that way. A faceless doll couldn't judge you. $20, someone offered, but even as the words came out, Clara heard the reluctance in them. $20, thank you, sir." "Do I hear 25? Nothing. The man who'd bid was already shaking his head, backing away. Clara understood. He'd bid out of politeness or pity or because his wife had elbowed him. But he didn't want her any more than the others did. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Going once for $20? Clara's chest tightened. She knew what came next. If no one bid, she'd go back to the territorial orphanage, where children who couldn't be placed waited in dim rooms until they were old enough to be turned out. She'd seen those rooms when the train had stopped in Denver. She'd seen the empty eyes of the children who'd given up hoping. Going twice. The words felt like rocks dropping into deep water, each one pulling her further down. Clara closed her eyes and thought about the mountains, about the wild places where no one could judge you for being unwanted. She'd heard stories about children who ran away, who lived in the hills and survived on their own. Maybe that wouldn't be so bad. Maybe being alone was better than being constantly rejected. She opened her mouth, and the words came out before she could stop them. A whisper, but in the sudden silence it carried, "No one wants me." The crowd froze. Some people had the grace to look ashamed. Others just looked uncomfortable, eager to move on to more pleasant business. Clara felt her face burn, but she didn't take the words back. They were true. They'd been true in Philadelphia, true in the 3 homes that had sent her back, true here in this dusty Wyoming yard where even the dogs had more value than she did. The auctioneer lowered his gavel. His red face had gone redder. "Now, miss, that's not $50. The voice came from the back of the yard, deep and quiet, but carrying authority that made heads turn. Clara's eyes snapped open. A man stood apart from the crowd, one boot propped on the lower rail of the horse pen. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black hat that shadowed his face. Dust covered his clothes like he'd ridden hard to get here, and when he moved forward, the crowd parted without being asked. $50, he repeated, his voice steady. For the girl. The auctioneer recovered quickly. Well, now, that's more like it. $50, thank you, Mr. Cole. Ethan Cole. A ripple went through the crowd. Clara saw recognition in their faces, heard the whispers start. She didn't know the name, but clearly everyone else did. Mr. Cole, the auctioneer said, his voice now warm with enthusiasm. An honor, sir. Do I hear 55? Silence. No one was going to bid against Ethan Cole, whoever he was. Going once? Going twice? The gavel fell. Sold to Mr. Ethan Cole for $50. Clara stared as the man approached the platform. Up close, she could see his face, hard-lined and weathered, maybe 35 or 40, with gray eyes that looked at her without the pity she'd learned to hate. He didn't smile. He didn't make soothing noises or talk to her like she was a frightened animal. He just looked at her, and Clara had the strangest feeling that he actually saw her. Not a charity case, not a worker, not a burden, just her. Can you climb down yourself? He asked. Clara nodded. She could do most things herself. She'd had to. She handed her doll to him, an automatic gesture of trust that surprised her, and climbed down from the platform. Her legs shook when she hit the ground, but she steadied herself. The man handed the doll back without comment, then turned to the auctioneer's assistant who was waiting with papers. I'll need the certificate of placement, Ethan said. Of course, Mr. Cole, just need your signature and the payment. Clara watched as he pulled out a leather wallet and counted out bills without hesitation. $50. That was more money than she'd ever seen, enough to buy a good horse or a month's supplies or, apparently, one unwanted orphan girl. The transaction completed, Ethan turned back to her. You have anything else? Belongings? Clara shook her head. The doll was all she owned. Everything else, the extra dress, the shoes that pinched, had been orphanage property, returned when she'd boarded the train. All right then. He gestured toward a wagon at the edge of the yard. That's mine. You can wait there while I finish my business. He walked away toward the horse pens without looking back, leaving Clara standing alone with her doll and a piece of paper that said she now belonged to Ethan Cole of the Double C Ranch, wherever that was. She made her way to the wagon on trembling legs. It was a sturdy working wagon, well maintained with 2 horses hitched to it, a matched pair of bays that stood quietly, their coats gleaming with care. Clara had learned to read people by how they treated animals. These horses were well-fed, well-groomed, calm. That meant something. She climbed into the wagon bed and sat with her back against the sideboard, hugging her doll to her chest. From here, she could see Ethan Cole moving among the horses in the pen, examining them with the same quiet attention he'd given her. He ran his hands over their legs, checked their teeth, watched how they moved. He bought 3, young stock, sturdy and sound, and arranged for them to be delivered to his ranch. The sun had shifted by the time he returned to the wagon. Other buyers were leaving, wagons and horses kicking up dust as they headed out in different directions. Clara watched families reuniting with their newly purchased children, some gentle, some indifferent, some already barking orders. She wondered which kind Ethan Cole would be. He swung up onto the wagon seat without a word, gathered the reins, and clicked to the horses. The wagon rolled forward, wheels creaking, and Clara gripped the sideboard as they left the auction yard behind. They drove in silence through Cheyenne, a rough frontier town of false-fronted buildings and muddy streets, cowboys and cattle, saloons and supply stores. Clara had been through bigger cities, but this one felt different somehow, more raw, more honest about what it was. Once they cleared this town, the land opened up into rolling grassland that stretched toward the mountains. The road was rutted but passable, winding between sage-covered hills dotted with pine. The air smelled clean, sage and grass and distance. Clara breathed it in, feeling something tight in her chest start to loosen. After an hour, Ethan spoke. "You hungry?" Clara started. She'd been so lost in watching the landscape that she'd almost forgotten she wasn't alone. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. He pulled the wagon off the road near a stand of cottonwoods where a creek ran clear over smooth stones. Without explaining, he climbed down and began unhitching the horses to let them drink and graze. Clara watched, unsure what to do. Finally, she climbed down too, her legs stiff from sitting. Ethan pulled a canvas pack from under the wagon seat and extracted a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was bread, cheese, and dried beef. He broke off portions and handed them to Clara without ceremony. "Thank you," she whispered. They ate in silence, sitting on a fallen log by the creek. The water burbled over stones, and somewhere a meadowlark sang. Clara ate slowly, making the food last, still not entirely sure this was real. In her experience, good things had a way of dissolving into disappointment. "You're wondering why I bought you," Ethan said finally. Clara looked up, startled. She hadn't expected him to address it directly. "Most men want workers," he continued, his eyes on the creek. "House help, ranch hands. I've got workers. Don't need more." Clara's stomach clenched. Was he going to return her already? Trade her for one of the other children? "I came for horses today," Ethan said. "Needed new stock for breeding. Wasn't planning on taking a child." He paused, and something crossed his face, a shadow, a memory. "But when you said those words, 'No one wants me,' I heard myself 25 years ago." Clara held very still, barely breathing. "I was 6 when my mother died," Ethan said quietly. "My father drank himself to death a year later. I got passed around to relatives who didn't want an extra mouth to feed. Know what that feels like? Being a burden everywhere you go?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "A rancher named Henry Cole took me in when I was 10. Worked me hard, but he was fair. Taught me everything about horses, cattle, the land. When he died, he left me the ranch. No blood relation, just choice." Ethan finally looked at her. "He chose me when no one else would. Changed my whole life." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. "I'm not Henry Cole," Ethan continued. "I'm not warm or soft-spoken. I won't coddle you or make pretty promises. But I'll keep you safe, feed you proper, give you a home where you don't have to earn your keep by being perfect." Clara felt something crack open inside her chest, something she'd kept locked tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "Why?" she whispered. "Because nobody should feel unwanted," Ethan said simply, "especially not a child." He stood, brushing crumbs from his pants. "We've got another 3 hours to the ranch. You can ride up front if you want, or stay in the back. Your choice." Clara scrambled to her feet. "Front, please." The corner of Ethan's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something like one. "All right then." They hitched the horses again and continued on. Clara sat on the wagon seat, her doll in her lap, watching the landscape change from grassland to rolling hills thick with pine. The road climbed steadily, and the air grew cooler, fresher. "What's the ranch like?" Clara asked, surprising herself with the question. "Big," Ethan said. 5,000 acres, give or take. Cattle mostly, some horses. Got a foreman named Jack, who's been with me 10 years, and 3 hands, who come and go depending on season. Main house is log, 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, big kitchen. Built it myself 5 years back." Do you have a wife?" Clara had seen no ring, but she had to ask. No. The word was flat, final. Never married, never saw the point. Clara absorbed this. A bachelor rancher taking in an orphan girl. She'd heard stories, some of them dark, about men who took in children for the wrong reasons. But something in Ethan's manner, in the way he'd spoken about his own childhood, made her think this was different. Will I have chores? She asked. Everyone works on a ranch, Ethan said. But age-appropriate work? Feeding chickens, gathering eggs, helping in the garden, maybe learning to cook when you're ready. Nothing beyond your capability. I can cook some, Claire offered, and mend. And I'm good with numbers. Ethan glanced at her with something that might have been approval. That'll be useful. Ranch accounts need keeping. They crested a hill and suddenly the valley spread below them, a vast sweep of grassland bordered by pine-covered mountains, a silver ribbon of river cutting through the middle. And there, nestled against the hillside, was the ranch. The main house was exactly as Ethan had described, solid log construction, 2 stories with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Outbuildings clustered nearby, barn, bunkhouse, chicken coop, smokehouse, tool sheds. Corrals held horses and cattle. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. It looked permanent, real, like a place that would still be standing tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. That's home, Ethan said simply. Home. Clara had never had a home, not really, just temporary stops, way stations between one rejection and the next. Could this place actually be different? As they descended into the valley, a man emerged from the barn, lean and weathered, with a gray beard and quick movements. He stopped when he saw the wagon, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Clara. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop near the house. Jack, this is Clara Wynne. She'll be staying with us. Jack's surprise was evident, but he covered it quickly. Miss Clara, he touched his hat brim. Welcome to the Double C. Thank you, Clara whispered. She'll need a room set up, Ethan said, climbing down. The one on the east side, I think. Gets morning sun. I'll see to it, Jack said, but his eyes were full of questions. Ethan helped Clara down from the wagon with a hand that was careful but not condescending. You'll bunk with me in the kitchen tonight while Jack airs out your room proper. Tomorrow, we'll get you settled. He led her into the house, and Clara stepped into a space that took her breath away. The main room was huge, open ceiling with exposed beams, a massive stone fireplace, furniture that was simple but well made. Everything was clean, organized, cared for. Through an archway, she could see the kitchen, bright and spacious, with a cast-iron stove and a long wooden table. Hungry again? Ethan asked, moving to the stove. Clara shook her head. She was too overwhelmed to eat. Well, I am. He built up the fire and set a pot of coffee to brew, then started slicing bread and ham with efficient movements. Sit if you want, or look around. House is yours too now. Clara sat at the kitchen table, her doll in her lap, and watched Ethan move through his domain. He wasn't graceful exactly, but he was competent, every movement purposeful, no wasted effort. When the coffee was ready, he poured 2 cups, added cream and sugar to one without asking, and set it in front of her. You look like you could use something warm, he said. Clara wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her fingers. The coffee was sweet and creamy, perfect for a child's taste. She sipped it slowly while Ethan made sandwiches, thick slices of ham on fresh bread with butter and sharp cheese. They ate in comfortable silence. Outside, Clara could hear the sounds of the ranch settling for evening, horses nickering, cattle lowing in the distance, the creak of the windmill turning in the breeze. Through the window, the mountains were turning purple in the fading light. You'll have nightmares, Ethan said abruptly. Most kids who've been through what you have, they do. If you wake up scared, you can come find me. My room's downstairs, first door on the right. Clara stared at him. No one had ever acknowledged that she had nightmares, much less given her permission to seek comfort. I won't be angry, Ethan continued, and I won't think less of you. Fear's not weakness, it's just fear. You understand? Clara nodded, her throat tight. After dinner, Ethan showed her to a small room off the kitchen. A storage room, really, but he'd set up a cot with clean blankets and a pillow. Just for tonight, he reminded her. Tomorrow you'll have a proper room. Clara changed into the nightgown he provided, too big, but soft and clean, and climbed into the cot. Ethan stood in the doorway, his large frame silhouetted against the lamplight. "Sleep well, Clara," he said quietly. "Mr. Cole?" Her voice came out small. "Ethan," he corrected. "You can call me Ethan." "Ethan." She tried the name. "Thank you for choosing me." Something shifted in his expression, something vulnerable and raw. "You chose yourself," he said, "when you spoke up on that platform. That took courage most adults don't have." He closed the door partway, leaving it open enough that light spilled in and she wouldn't feel trapped. Clara lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling, the wind in the eaves, the distant call of an owl. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not happiness, exactly. She didn't trust that yet. But maybe the beginning of hope. She closed her eyes, her doll tucked under her chin, and let herself imagine that this time might be different, that this place, this man who understood being unwanted, might actually let her stay. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched vast and star-filled over the Double C Ranch. Inside, an 8-year-old girl who'd been told she was worthless drifted toward sleep in a house that smelled like coffee and pine, where a man who knew loneliness had opened his door because he remembered what it felt like to be the child no one chose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust didn't come quickly to damaged hearts, and building a family from broken pieces took more than good intentions. But in that moment, on that first night, both Clara and Ethan allowed themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd found what they'd been searching for all along. Someone who understood. Someone who stayed. Someone who chose them back. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through a window she didn't recognize and the smell of bacon frying. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was she? Then memory returned. The auction, the wagon ride, Ethan Cole, the Double C Ranch. She sat up slowly, her heart still racing. The nightmares had come, just as Ethan predicted. She dreamed of the platform, of faces turning away, of falling into darkness while voices whispered that she wasn't worth saving. But she hadn't gone to find him. Old habits died hard, and Clara had learned long ago not to burden others with her fears. She dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes, the only ones she had, and emerged from the small room to find Ethan at the stove, expertly flipping bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He glanced up when she entered. "Coffee's ready," he said, as if finding an 8-year-old in his kitchen was the most natural thing in the world. "Eggs in 2 minutes." Clara poured herself coffee the way he'd prepared it yesterday, cream and sugar, and sat at the table. Through the window she could see Jack leading horses out to pasture, their breath steaming in the cool morning air. "Sleep all right?" Ethan asked, sliding eggs onto 2 plates. Clara hesitated. She could lie, say everything was fine. That's what she'd always done before. But something about Ethan's directness made her want to be honest. "Nightmares," she admitted quietly. "But I managed." Ethan set a plate in front of her. 3 eggs, 4 strips of bacon, thick slices of toasted bread with butter. More food than she usually ate in a day. "Next time, come find me. That's what I'm here for." "You said you weren't going to coddle me," Clara said, surprising herself with the challenge. "Not coddling, just being available. There's a difference." He sat across from her with his own plate. "Eat up. We've got a full day." The eggs were perfectly cooked, the bacon crispy, the bread still warm. Clara ate slowly, savoring each bite. Ethan ate with the efficiency of a working man, but he waited until she finished before clearing the plates. "First order of business, get you some proper clothes," he said. "Can't have you wearing the same dress every day. We'll ride into town after I finish morning chores. You know how to ride?" Clara shook her head. "You'll learn, but for today the wagon will do." He pulled on his coat. "You can come with me to the barn if you want, or stay here. Jack's wife Martha will be by later to start cleaning your room. She's going to have questions. Just answer what you're comfortable with." Clara followed him outside, staying close but not clinging. The morning air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and hay. Chickens scratched in their yard, and a barn cat wound between Ethan's legs before darting away. The barn was a cathedral of wood and light, dust motes dancing in the sunbeams that slanted through gaps in the walls. Horses nickered from their stalls, and Clara could hear cattle moving in the pens beyond. Ethan moved through the space with quiet authority, checking water troughs, distributing hay, running his hands over each horse to check for injury or illness. "This is Ranger," he said, pausing at a stall that held a massive black gelding. "He's my riding horse. Been with me 8 years, steady as they come." He moved to the next stall. "And this is Daisy. She's gentle, good for learning. When you're ready, she'll be yours to ride." Clara stared at the pretty sorrel mare with the white blaze. "Mine? If you're going to live on a ranch, you need to know how to ride," Ethan said practically. "Can't walk everywhere out here. Distances are too great." A woman's voice called from the barn entrance. "Ethan Cole, what in heaven's name have you done?" Clara turned to see a plump woman in her 50s, hands on her hips, eyes wide with astonishment. She wore a faded calico dress and an apron, her gray-streaked hair pinned in a practical bun. "Morning, Martha," Ethan said calmly. "This is Clara Wynn." "Clara, this is Martha Hayes, Jack's wife. She helps with the house and cooking when we need it." Martha's expression softened as she looked at Clara. "Lord have mercy, child, you're nothing but skin and bones." She turned back to Ethan. "You went to buy horses and came back with a girl?" "Something like that," Ethan said. "Does she have any clothes? Any belongings at all?" "Just what she's wearing." Martha made a noise of pure determination. "Well, that won't do. Not at all." She approached Clara with the brisk kindness of a woman who'd raised 6 children of her own. "Come with me, dear. We'll see what we can manage until Ethan takes you to town." Before Clara could protest, Martha had swept her back to the house and up the stairs to the east-facing room Ethan had mentioned. It was empty except for a bed frame and a washstand, but the windows were large and the morning light filled it with warmth. "We'll need a mattress, linens, a dresser," Martha muttered, making mental lists. "Curtains for the windows, a rug for the floor, and clothes. Heaven help us, this child needs clothes." She turned to Clara with unexpected gentleness. "Did he tell you why he brought you here?" Clara nodded. "He said he understood being unwanted." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "That man, he's got the heart of a saint buried under all that gruffness." She pulled a handkerchief from her apron and dabbed at her eyes. "I've known Ethan Cole for 15 years, since he first inherited this ranch. Never seen him so much as look at a woman, let alone bring home a child. You must have touched something in him he keeps well hidden." "I didn't mean to be a burden," Clara said softly. "Burden?" Martha laughed. "Child, Ethan Cole doesn't do anything he doesn't want to do. If he brought you here, it's because he chose to. Now, let me see what I can find for you to wear until we get you proper fitted." She disappeared and returned with a bundle of clothing, a dress that had belonged to one of her granddaughters, still too big but closer to Clara's size. "It'll do for now. Change out of that worn thing and we'll wash it proper." Clara changed in the empty room, the floorboards cool under her bare feet. The dress was blue cotton, faded but clean, with buttons up the front and a sash at the waist. She looked at herself in the washstand mirror, a thin girl with tangled hair and wary eyes, swimming in borrowed clothes. When she came downstairs, Ethan was waiting by the door, hat in hand. "Ready?" The wagon ride to Cheyenne took 2 hours. Ethan drove in his usual silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable quiet. Clara watched the landscape roll past. Endless grassland, distant mountains, the occasional ranch house or line shack. The sky was impossibly blue, so different from the cramped streets of Philadelphia. "What will people say?" she asked finally. "About you taking me in?" Ethan considered this. "Some will think I'm crazy, some will think I'm soft. Some will make up stories that aren't true." He glanced at her. "Does that worry you?" "I'm used to people talking about me," Clara said. "They talked at every home I went to, about how I was too quiet, too strange, too much trouble." "You're not too anything," Ethan said firmly. "You're exactly who you're supposed to be, and anyone who says different can answer to me." The words settled into Clara's chest like warm stones, weighing down the anxious flutter that had lived there for so long. Cheyenne was busier than yesterday, the streets crowded with wagons and riders. Ethan navigated to a general store and helped Clara down. Inside, the store smelled of leather and spices, tobacco, and new fabric. A woman behind the counter looked up, her smile professional until she recognized Ethan. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice warming. "What brings you to town?" "Need clothes for the girl," Ethan said without preamble. "Everything, dresses, shoes, nightgowns, undergarments, coat for winter. Whatever she needs." The woman's eyebrows rose. "The girl?" "Clara Wynne," Ethan said. "She's living at the ranch now." The woman's expression shifted through several emotions before landing on careful politeness. "I see. Well, let's get her measured then." For the next hour, Clara was fitted and measured, held up against fabrics and patterns. The shopkeeper, Mrs. Anderson, she learned, was professional but clearly curious, stealing glances at Ethan as if trying to solve a puzzle. "How many dresses?" Mrs. Anderson asked. "6 for every day, 2 for Sunday," Ethan said. "She'll need warm things. Winter comes early up in the mountains." "Mr. Cole, that's quite an expense." "I didn't ask about expense. I asked you to outfit her properly." Mrs. Anderson fell silent and continued her work. When they'd selected everything, the total made Clara's breath catch. More money than she'd ever imagined being spent on her. But Ethan paid without hesitation, arranging for the items that needed tailoring to be delivered to the ranch within the week. Their next stop was the bootmaker, where Clara was fitted for sturdy boots and lighter shoes. Then the general store for hairbrushes and ribbons, soap and tooth powder, all the small necessities of daily life that Clara had never owned. As they loaded the parcels into the wagon, a well-dressed woman approached. She was perhaps 40, with sharp eyes and an expensive dress that seemed out of place in the frontier town. "Ethan Cole," she said, her voice carrying authority. "I heard a rumor that couldn't possibly be true." "Mrs. Hartley," Ethan said, his tone neutral. "They say you purchased an orphan girl at yesterday's auction." Mrs. Hartley's gaze swept over Clara with clinical assessment. "Surely you understand how inappropriate that appears. A bachelor rancher, a young girl." "Careful," Ethan said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "You're about to say something you'll regret." Mrs. Hartley drew herself up. "I'm simply concerned for propriety, for the child's welfare. There are proper channels for these things. Families who could what? Pass her around until she believes she's worthless?" Ethan's words were quiet but sharp as blade. "Clara has a home now. A real one. If that bothers you, I suggest you examine why." "The Territorial Child Welfare Board will need to approve this arrangement," Mrs. Hartley said stiffly. "I sit on that board, Mr. Cole, and I can assure you we take our responsibilities seriously." "Then do your job," Ethan said. "Come inspect the ranch, talk to Clara, verify she's fed, clothed, educated, and safe. You'll find everything in order." Mrs. Hartley's mouth thinned. "We shall see." "Good day, Mr. Cole." She swept away, her skirts rustling with indignation. Clara felt panic rising. "She can take me away?" "She can try," Ethan said grimly, "but she won't succeed. Get in the wagon, Clara. We're going home." The ride back was tense. Clara could see the anger in Ethan's jaw, the way his hands gripped the reins too tight. After an hour, he seemed to make a conscious effort to relax. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," he said. "Is she right? Is it wrong for you to take me in?" "No." The word was absolute. "What's wrong is a system that treats children like property. What's wrong is a world where people like Mrs. Hartley care more about appearances than actual welfare." He looked at her. "You're not going anywhere, Clara. I made a promise when I bid on you, and I keep my promises." "What if they don't let you keep me?" "Then we'll fight. In court if we have to." His expression softened slightly. "But it won't come to that. Martha and Jack will vouch for us. The ranch is prosperous and well run. You'll be educated, cared for, safe. That's all the law requires." Clara wanted to believe him, but she'd learned that adults made promises they didn't keep, that safety was temporary, that belonging was always conditional. As if reading her thoughts, Ethan said, "I know you don't trust this yet. I know you're waiting for it to fall apart. That's all right. Trust takes time, but I'll be here every day proving it to you. Eventually you'll believe it." When they reached the ranch, Jack was waiting with news. Martha's got your room set up, he told Clara. Borrowed furniture from our place until you can get your own. She's been cooking up a storm, too. Says a growing girl needs proper meals. Clara followed Martha upstairs to find the empty room transformed. A bed with a real mattress stood against one wall, covered in a quilt Martha had brought from home. A small dresser held a water pitcher and basin. Rag rugs covered the floor, and simple curtains hung at the windows. It was sparse, but it was clean and warm and hers. "Thank you," Clara whispered. Martha pulled her into a soft hug that smelled like flower and lavender. "You're welcome here, child. Don't you forget that." That night at dinner, beef stew with vegetables and fresh bread, Jack and Martha joined them at the big kitchen table. The conversation flowed around Clara, ranch business, plans for winter, news from neighboring spreads. She listened, learning the rhythms of this new world. "Girl needs schooling," Martha said as they cleared plates. "Can't have her growing up ignorant." "I can read," Clara offered, "and write some. The sisters taught me." "That's a start," Ethan said. "But Martha's right. We'll need to arrange proper education." "I could teach her," Martha said. "I taught all 6 of mine: reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography. She could come to our cabin 3 mornings a week." "I'd like that," Clara said softly. Ethan nodded. "We'll start next week. Give her time to settle in first." After Jack and Martha left, Ethan showed Clara the ranch ledgers, thick books filled with columns of numbers tracking expenses, inventory, breeding records, sales. "You said you're good with numbers. Think you could help me keep these straight?" Clara studied the neat handwriting, the careful calculations. "I think so." "Good. That'll be your job then, when you're ready. Every rancher needs a good bookkeeper." That night, Clara lay in her new bed, her faceless doll beside her, and listened to the house settling. Her room smelled like pine and fresh air, and through the window she could see stars scattered across the black sky like spilled salt. The nightmares came again. They always did. But this time, when she woke gasping in the darkness, she remembered Ethan's words. She climbed out of bed, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor, and made her way downstairs. Ethan's door was ajar. She knocked softly. "Come in," his voice said immediately, alert. She pushed the door open. Ethan was sitting up in bed, a lamp already lit on the bedside table, as if he'd been waiting. "Nightmare?" he asked. Clara nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. "Same one?" "Yes, the auction, everyone walking away." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I have them too sometimes. Different details, but the same feeling. Being unwanted, being invisible." He gestured to a chair by his window. "You can sit there if you want, or go back to bed. Whatever helps." Clara sat in the chair, pulling her knees to her chest. Ethan picked up a book from his nightstand and began reading aloud. Something about cattle ranching, practical and boring, but his voice was steady and calm. After a while, Clara's breathing evened out. "Better?" Ethan asked. "Yes, thank you. Any time. That's what I'm here for." Clara stood to leave, then paused. "Ethan? Why did you really choose me? There were younger children, prettier ones who weren't so broken." Ethan set down his book and looked at her with those steady gray eyes. "You're not broken, Clara. You're wounded. There's a difference. Broken things can't be fixed. Wounded things heal, given time and care." He paused. "And I chose you because when you spoke up on that platform, you showed more courage than most adults ever find. You named your pain instead of hiding it. That takes strength." Clara felt tears burning her eyes. "I don't feel strong." Strength isn't about feeling strong. It's about keeping going even when you don't feel strong. You've survived things that would have destroyed weaker people. That makes you one of the strongest people I know. The tears spilled over, and Clara didn't try to stop them. She cried for the first time since the orphanage, great heaving sobs that shook her thin frame. Ethan let her cry without trying to fix it or make it stop. He just sat there, steady and present, until the storm passed. "I'm scared," Clara whispered when she could speak again. "Of what?" "That this is temporary, that you'll change your mind, that Mrs. Hartley will take me away, that I'll wake up and this will all be a dream." Those are reasonable fears, Ethan said, given what you've been through, but here's what I know. I don't change my mind once it's made up. Mrs. Hartley can inspect all she wants. She'll find nothing wrong. And this isn't a dream, though I understand why you might wish it was, to protect yourself from disappointment. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the dark ranch. I can't promise that life will always be easy, Clara. Ranching is hard work. Winters are brutal. We'll have disagreements. You'll test boundaries. Children do. But I can promise you this. I will not abandon you. I will not send you back. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be. Forever? The word came out small, hopeful. Forever, Ethan confirmed. Clara went back to bed then, carrying those words like a talisman against the dark. She slept dreamlessly until morning, when she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Ethan moving around the kitchen below, steady and real and there. The days began to develop a rhythm. Clara woke early, helped Ethan with breakfast, then followed him through morning chores. She learned to gather eggs without frightening the chickens, to measure feed for the horses, to recognize the signs of sickness or injury in the livestock. Ethan taught her with patient demonstration, never frustrated when she made mistakes. 3 mornings a week she rode in the wagon to Jack and Martha's cabin for lessons. Martha proved to be an excellent teacher, drilling Clara in arithmetic and grammar while sharing stories from her own childhood in Missouri. Clara's reading improved rapidly, and she devoured the books Martha lent her. Afternoons were for ranch work, helping Martha with cooking and preserving, learning to mend harnesses and tack, practicing her numbers in the ranch ledgers under Ethan's watchful eye. He was exacting about the accounts, but fair, showing her how to track every penny that came in and went out. Evenings they spent by the fire, Ethan reading ranch journals while Clara practiced her letters or worked on the sampler Martha had started teaching her. Sometimes Ethan would tell stories about the ranch's history, about building the house log by log, about the blizzard of '76 that had nearly destroyed everything, about the spring he'd delivered 43 calves in 10 days with no sleep. Clara listened hungrily, learning the shape of this new world, finding her place in it. 2 weeks after her arrival, a wagon appeared at the ranch entrance. Clara was in the garden with Martha when she heard it, and fear shot through her. "It's all right," Martha said, touching her shoulder. Ethan expected this. Mrs. Hartley climbed down from the wagon, accompanied by a stern-looking man in a city suit. They approached the house with official purpose, and Ethan met them on the porch, his expression neutral. "Mr. Cole," Mrs. Hartley said, "this is Judge Morrison from the Territorial Court. We're here to inspect the living arrangements and interview the child." "Of course," Ethan said. "Clara, come here, please." Clara walked to the porch on shaking legs. The judge looked her over with sharp eyes. "How old are you, child?" he asked. "8, sir." "And Mr. Cole has been treating you well?" Clara looked at Ethan, then back at the judge. She could play it safe, say what they wanted to hear, or she could tell the truth. She thought about Ethan's words, about courage, about naming pain instead of hiding it. "He's been kinder to me than anyone ever has," she said clearly. "He feeds me good food, bought me clothes and books, makes sure I get educated. He doesn't yell or hit. He listens when I talk. He lets me cry when I need to." Her voice strengthened. "He chose me when no one else would. That's worth everything." The judge's expression softened slightly. "I see. May we tour the house?" For the next hour, Mrs. Hartley and Judge Morrison inspected every room, questioned Clara about her daily routine, examined the pantry and the account books, spoke with Martha and Jack. Clara watched Ethan's face remain calm throughout, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Finally, they gathered again on the porch. Judge Morrison pulled out papers. "Mr. Cole, the arrangement is highly unusual," he said, "but I find nothing deficient in Clara's care. She's well fed, properly clothed, receiving education, and appears content. However, given your bachelor status, I'm requiring monthly check-ins for the first year to ensure continued compliance with territorial standards." "That's acceptable," Ethan said. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I'm appointing Martha Hayes as official guardian supervisor, as having a woman's oversight will address propriety concerns." Martha stepped forward. "I accept that responsibility, Your Honor." "Then we're agreed." Judge Morrison signed the papers with a flourish. Clara Wynne is formally placed in your care, Mr. Cole, under the supervision of Mrs. Hayes, subject to monthly review. After they left, Ethan let out a breath he'd been holding. Clara realized she'd been holding hers too. Is it over? She asked. For now, Ethan said. They'll check on us monthly, but that's fine. We've got nothing to hide. That night, Clara didn't have nightmares. She slept deeply, dreamlessly, her body finally believing what her mind was starting to accept. She was safe. She was wanted. She was home. The first snow came in late October, 6 weeks after Clara arrived at the Double C. She woke to a world transformed, everything blanketed in white that sparkled like diamonds under the morning sun. She pressed her face to the window, breath fogging the glass, and felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Wonder, pure and uncomplicated. First snow's always the prettiest, Ethan said from her doorway. Before it gets trampled and dirty. Come on, breakfast is ready. We've got extra work today. Snow meant different chores, Clara learned quickly. Paths had to be shoveled, extra hay brought to the livestock, water troughs checked for ice. She bundled into the warm coat Ethan had bought her and followed him into the crystalline morning, her breath puffing white in the cold air. Stay close, Ethan warned. Easy to get turned around in snow, especially if the wind picks up. But the day remained clear and still, the kind of perfect winter morning that made the whole world feel clean and new. Clara helped Jack spread hay while Ethan checked the cattle in the far pasture. Martha arrived mid-morning with a basket of fresh bread and the news that the territorial inspector would be coming the following week for the first monthly review. Nothing to worry about, Martha assured Clara, who'd gone tense at the mention. They'll see what they saw before, a happy child in a good home. But as November turned to December, Clara noticed something shifting. Mrs. Hartley had apparently been talking, because whispers followed them whenever they went to town. Women gathered in tight knots outside the mercantile, their conversation stopping when Ethan and Clara passed. Men looked at Ethan with expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed judgment. People sure do love to gossip, Jack muttered one evening after a particularly uncomfortable trip to the feed store. Act like Ethan committed a crime instead of doing a decent thing. Let them talk, Ethan said, but Clara could see the weight of it in his shoulders, the way his jaw set harder each time they faced the stairs. The monthly inspection came and went without incident. The territorial agent, a different man this time, younger and less severe, spoke with Clara privately, asked about her schooling and her daily life, examined her room and the pantry. He seemed satisfied, even impressed, but warned that community perception mattered. People are concerned about propriety, he told Ethan. A bachelor raising a young girl alone, it raises questions. Let them question, Ethan said flatly. Clara's welfare is what matters, not small-minded gossip. But the gossip grew sharper. Clara overheard snippets in town, speculation about Ethan's motives, dark insinuations about why a man would take in a child. The words stung like wasps, and she saw how they stung Ethan too, though he never showed it except in the tightness around his eyes. It was Martha who finally confronted it head-on. She stormed into the ranch house one December afternoon, her face flushed with anger. That Hartley woman is spreading poison, she announced. Told half the town that your arrangement is highly irregular and potentially dangerous for the child. She's convinced Judge Morrison needs to reconsider the placement. Ethan's face went stone still. On what grounds? Impropriety. Lack of female supervision. She's claiming I'm not adequate oversight because I don't live here full-time. Martha's voice shook with fury. She's calling for Clara to be placed with a proper family. Her family, specifically. She's got a sister in Denver who runs a boarding house for orphans. Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. No, she whispered. Please, no. Ethan was beside her in an instant, his hand firm on her shoulder. That's not going to happen. She's filed a formal petition with the territorial court, Martha said. Hearing is set for January 15th. Ethan, she's serious about this. So am I. Ethan's voice carried an edge Clara had never heard before. She wants a fight, she'll get one. That night, after Martha left, Ethan sat Clara down at the kitchen table. His face was grave but calm, and when he spoke, his words were measured and clear. I need you to understand something, he said. What's about to happen won't be easy. Mrs. Hartley is going to try to paint me as unfit. Our home is inappropriate. She'll twist things, make them seem worse than they are. The court hearing will be difficult. Claire's hands twisted in her lap. Maybe I should just go. Save you the trouble. Look at me. Ethan waited until she met his eyes. I didn't bring you here to give up the first time things got hard. I brought you here because you deserve a home, and I'm prepared to fight to give you one. But I need to know, is this what you want? Do you want to stay here? Yes, Clara said, the word fierce and immediate. This is the only place I've ever felt safe. Then we fight, Ethan said simply. Together. The weeks leading to the hearing were tense. Ethan consulted with a lawyer in Cheyenne, a sharp-eyed man named Thomas Webb, who specialized in territorial law. Webb came to the ranch, interviewed Clara extensively, examined the household arrangements, and spoke at length with both Ethan and Martha. The case against you is built entirely on perception, not fact, Webb told Ethan. Clara is demonstrably well cared for. She's healthy, educated, happy, but Mrs. Hartley will argue that propriety matters, that a child needs a woman's influence, that your motivations are questionable simply because you're an unmarried man. My motivations are none of her damn business, Ethan said. Unfortunately, the court may disagree. Webb tapped his pencil against his notes. We need to make a compelling case that Clara's current placement is not just adequate, but optimal, that removing her would cause genuine harm. It would, Clara said quietly. Both men turned to look at her. Being sent away again would break something in me. I've been sent away so many times. I can't do it again. Webb's expression softened. Would you be willing to testify to that in court? Clara looked at Ethan, who nodded slightly. Yes, she said. I'll tell them the truth. Christmas came, strange and wonderful. Martha taught Clara to make gingerbread, and together they decorated the ranch house with pine boughs and ribbons. Ethan brought home a small pine tree that they stood in the corner of the main room, and Clara made paper ornaments to hang from its branches. On Christmas morning, Clara woke to find packages wrapped in brown paper beside the tree. Ethan sat in his chair with a cup of coffee, watching her with something that might have been nervousness. Go ahead, he said. Open them. Inside the packages were treasures, a new dress in deep blue wool, a set of hair ribbons, a book of fairy tales with illustrated plates, a wooden box filled with colored pencils and drawing paper, and wrapped in the softest cloth, a new doll. This one had a painted face with kind eyes and a gentle smile, dark hair like Clara's, and a dress that matched Clara's new one. She has a face, Clara whispered, touching the doll's painted features. Thought you might be ready for that, Ethan said quietly. Faces aren't so scary when you're not afraid of being seen. Clara threw her arms around him, surprising them both. Ethan hesitated only a moment before hugging her back, his large hands gentle on her small shoulders. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. You're welcome, he said. I got you something else, too. It's outside. In the barn, saddled and waiting, stood Daisy. The sorrel mare nickered softly when Clara approached, her dark eyes calm and friendly. She's yours, Ethan said, officially, and today you're going to learn to ride her. The riding lesson took all morning, with Ethan patient and encouraging as Clara learned to mount, to sit properly, to hold the reins and guide the gentle mare around the corral. She fell once, landing hard in the snow, but scrambled up immediately with determination in her eyes. That's my girl, Ethan said, pride clear in his voice. Get back up there. By afternoon, Clara could walk Daisy in confident circles, and the joy on her face made even Jack grin. Never seen a kid take to riding so natural, Jack said. She's got good hands, Ethan, real good. But beneath the Christmas joy, the approaching hearing loomed like a storm cloud. As January crept closer, Clara's nightmares returned with new intensity. She woke gasping most nights, and each time she found her way to Ethan's door, he was waiting, ready to sit with her until the fear subsided. What if they take me away? She asked one night, her voice small in the darkness. Then I'll appeal, Ethan said. And if that fails, I'll appeal again and again. I'll fight this as long as I have to. But what if you lose? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then I'll figure out another way. Maybe I'll get married, if that's what it takes to satisfy their propriety concerns. Maybe I'll move to a different territory with different laws. I don't know yet, but I know this. I won't give up on you, Clara. Ever. The night before the hearing, Clara couldn't sleep at all. She sat at her window watching stars wheel overhead, her new doll clutched tight, and tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring. Would the judge listen? Would he see that she was loved here, wanted here? Or would he only see what Mrs. Hartley wanted him to see? An improper arrangement, a questionable situation, a child who needed saving from the man who'd already saved her? Ethan knocked softly and entered without waiting for an answer. He sat on the edge of her bed, his presence solid and reassuring. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I need you to know something. You are not the unwanted girl from that auction platform anymore. You're Clara Wynne of the Double C Ranch. You're smart and brave and strong. You're my daughter in every way that matters, no matter what any piece of paper says." "You never asked me to call you father," Clara observed. "Didn't feel right to force it. That's something you'd have to choose on your own." Clara thought about this. "What if I want to choose it?" Ethan's breath caught. "Then I'd be honored." "Okay," Clara said softly. "Okay, Father." The word felt strange on her tongue, new and unfamiliar, but also right in a way that made her chest tight with emotion. Ethan pulled her into a hug, and Clara felt his shoulders shake once before he steadied himself. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice rough. "We've got a big day tomorrow." The territorial courthouse in Cheyenne was an imposing building of red brick and white columns designed to intimidate with its grandeur. Clara climbed the steps between Ethan and Thomas Webb, her new blue dress carefully pressed, her hair braided with ribbons. She looked like any proper young girl, which was exactly the point. Inside, the courtroom smelled of old wood and furniture polish. Mrs. Hartley sat in the front row with her lawyer, a sleek man in an expensive suit. She didn't look at Clara, which somehow made it worse. Judge Morrison presided, the same stern-faced man who'd approved Clara's placement 3 months ago. He called the court to order with a sharp crack of his gavel. "We're here regarding the petition of Mrs. Lucille Hartley to reconsider the placement of minor child Clara Wynne," he announced. "Mrs. Hartley, your opening statement." Mrs. Hartley's lawyer stood, smoothing his jacket. "Your Honor, this case is simple. A young girl requires the guidance and supervision of a woman, not the questionable care of a bachelor rancher. Mr. Cole's intentions may have been noble, but nobility doesn't make an arrangement proper. Mrs. Hartley's sister operates a reputable boarding house in Denver, specifically designed for the care and education of orphaned girls. Clara Wynne would be better served in such an environment, surrounded by female influence and proper moral instruction." He painted a picture of impropriety, of a lonely man and a vulnerable child, of an arrangement that raised too many questions. He suggested, never quite stating outright, that there was something unwholesome about a bachelor choosing to take in a young girl. Clara felt Ethan's hand tighten on the armrest beside her, but his face remained impassive. Webb stood for their defense. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hartley's concerns might carry weight if there were any evidence of impropriety, neglect, or harm. But there is none. Clara Wynne is thriving under Mr. Cole's care. She's healthy, well-fed, properly clothed, and receiving excellent education. She's happy. The only thing wrong with this placement is that it offends Mrs. Hartley's sense of how things should look rather than how they actually are." He called Martha to the stand first. She testified about Clara's transformation, about the careful attention Ethan paid to her welfare, about the countless small kindnesses she'd witnessed. She described the household routine, the education plan, the monthly inspections that had found nothing amiss. "Has Mr. Cole ever behaved inappropriately?" Mrs. Hartley's lawyer asked on cross-examination. "Never," Martha said firmly. "He's been nothing but proper and fatherly." "But you don't live in the household, do you, Mrs. Hayes?" "I'm there 3 times a week for lessons, and I visit frequently otherwise. I see enough to know that child is loved and well cared for." Jack testified next, speaking about Ethan's character, about the ranch's prosperity and stability, about watching Clara blossom from a frightened waif into a confident young girl. Then it was Clara's turn. Webb had prepared her, but her hand still shook as she approached the witness stand. Judge Morrison looked down at her with inscrutable eyes. "Clara," he said, not unkindly, I'm going to ask you some questions. I need you to answer honestly, even if you think the truth might hurt someone's feelings. Can you do that?" Clara nodded. "Yes, sir." "How does Mr. Cole treat you?" Clara thought about all the mornings waking to the smell of coffee, all the patient lessons in the barn, all the nights Ethan had sat with her through nightmares without complaint. "He treats me like I matter," she said clearly, "like I'm worth taking care of." "Has he ever struck you or spoken harshly to you?" "Never. He's firm sometimes when I'm learning something new, but never mean, never cruel." "What about other households you've been in? How does this compare?" Clara's throat tightened. "The other places, they made me feel like I was a burden, like they were doing me a favor by letting me exist in their space. Here I feel like I belong, like I'm part of something." "Do you want to stay with Mr. Cole?" "More than anything," Clara said, and her voice broke. "Please don't take me away. Please. He's the only person who's ever really wanted me." Mrs. Hartley's lawyer stood. "Clara, wouldn't you like to be around other girls your age, to have a proper mother figure?" "Martha teaches me," Clara said, "and I don't need other girls my age. I need people who won't give up on me when I'm difficult or scared or sad. I need people who see me for who I am and love me anyway." She looked directly at Mrs. Hartley. "The boarding house in Denver might be proper, but it won't be home. The Double C is home." "Thank you, Clara," Judge Morrison said gently. "You may step down." Ethan took the stand last. Under Webb's questioning, he explained his own childhood, his understanding of what it meant to be unwanted, his decision to give Clara the chance he'd been given. "I'm not a perfect man," he said. "I'm rough around the edges, not much for social niceties, but I know how to build a home. I know how to make a child feel safe. And I know that Clara needs stability more than she needs propriety." "Mr. Cole," Mrs. Hartley's lawyer said smoothly, "isn't it true that you have no experience raising children?" "None before Clara," Ethan admitted. "No wife, no family of your own?" "No." "Then how can you possibly believe you're equipped to raise a young girl through adolescence and into womanhood?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I believe it because I see it working." 3 months ago, Clara was a terrified child who thought she was worthless. Now she's learning to ride, helping with ranch accounts, laughing at dinner. She's growing into herself. That's not theory, that's fact. But what about her moral education, her preparation for society? Martha handles that. Clara's learning everything a young woman needs to know: cooking, sewing, managing a household. She's also learning to be strong, independent, unafraid. Those lessons are just as important. Some would say a girl needs softness, not strength. Some would be wrong, Ethan said flatly. The world's hard, especially for women. Clara needs to be strong enough to face it. The lawyer tried several more angles, but Ethan remained unshakable. Finally, Judge Morrison called for closing arguments. Mrs. Hartley's lawyer painted a picture of proper society, of the importance of female influence, of the questions that would follow Clara her whole life if she was raised by a bachelor rancher. Webb countered with facts. Clara's improved health, her educational progress, her clear emotional attachment to Ethan and the ranch. This court should be concerned with one thing, he concluded. What's best for Clara Wynne? And Clara has told you herself, she's home. Taking her from that home would be cruel, unjust, and harmful. I urge you to deny this petition. Judge Morrison stood. I'll take this under advisement. Court is adjourned until I reach a decision. The wait was agony. 3 days passed with no word. Clara moved through her chores mechanically, unable to eat, barely sleeping. Ethan was quiet and tense, his jaw tight with worry. On the 4th day, a messenger arrived with a summons to return to court. The courtroom was packed when they arrived. Word had spread, and it seemed half of Cheyenne wanted to witness the outcome. Clara sat between Ethan and Webb, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles went white. Judge Morrison entered, his face giving nothing away. He settled into his chair and opened a folder. I've given this matter considerable thought, he began. Mrs. Hartley's concerns about propriety are not without merit. Society has expectations, and those expectations serve a purpose. However, this court's primary obligation is to the welfare of the child, not to society's comfort. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. I've reviewed the monthly inspection reports. I've considered the testimony of all witnesses. And most importantly, I've listened to Clara herself. He looked directly at her. This young lady has shown remarkable courage and clarity in expressing her needs and wishes. He paused, and the courtroom held its breath. It's the finding of this court that Clara Wynn's placement with Ethan Cole is in her best interest and shall continue. The petition for removal is denied. Clara felt the words hit her like a physical force. Denied. She could stay. She could stay. Beside her, Ethan let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for days. His hand found hers and squeezed once, firm and reassuring. Judge Morrison continued. However, I'm imposing additional conditions. Monthly inspections will continue for the full year. Martha Hayes will increase her supervisory visits to 4 times weekly. And when Clara reaches the age of 12, this court will conduct a comprehensive review to ensure the arrangement remains appropriate through her teenage years. We accept those conditions, Webb said quickly. Mrs. Hartley stood, her face tight with anger. Your Honor, I must protest. Your protest is noted and overruled, Mrs. Hartley. My decision is final. The gavel cracked. Court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Some people looked approving, others scandalized. Clara didn't care about any of them. She turned to Ethan and saw something in his face she'd never seen before. Relief so profound, it was almost pain. We won, she whispered. We won, he confirmed. Outside the courthouse, Martha was waiting with Jack. She pulled Clara into a fierce hug. Never doubted it for a minute, she said, though her eyes were wet with tears. The ride home felt different somehow, lighter, freer. The mountains seemed closer, the sky bluer. Clara watched the familiar landscape roll past and felt something settle deep in her bones. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't conditional. This was real. That night, after a celebration dinner with Martha and Jack, Clara sat with Ethan on the porch, despite the January cold. Stars blazed overhead, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. Thank you, Clara said, for fighting for me. Always, Ethan said. That's what fathers do. Clara leaned against his shoulder, and Ethan's arm came around her, solid and warm. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted. The fight had proven what words alone couldn't, that their bond was real, recognized, protected. Clara Wynn had finally, truly, come home. Winter loosened its grip slowly that year, the snow melting in reluctant patches as February gave way to March. Clara watched the land transform from her bedroom window each morning, noting how the brown earth emerged like a promise beneath the white, how the creek swelled with runoff, how the first brave shoots of grass appeared in the south-facing pastures. She was 9 now. Her birthday had passed quietly in late February with cake and presents, Martha teaching her to make her own dress as a gift. The blue fabric now hung in her wardrobe alongside 5 other dresses, proof of permanence that still sometimes took her breath away. The monthly inspections had become routine, the territorial agent barely glancing at the household anymore before signing off on his reports. Even Mrs. Hartley had retreated into cold silence, no longer spreading her poison through town, though her disapproval remained evident in the way she turned her back whenever Clara and Ethan passed. Let her stew, Martha had said. Some people can't stand to see others happy when they themselves are miserable. Clara had learned not to let it bother her. She had more important things to focus on, like learning to manage Daisy at a canter, or mastering the complicated double-entry bookkeeping system Ethan used for the ranch accounts, or helping Martha put up preserves for the coming year. Spring brought new responsibilities. Calving season hit the Double C with its usual intensity, and Clara found herself in the barn at all hours, helping Ethan and Jack with difficult births, bottle-feeding orphaned calves, learning to recognize the signs of trouble before they became disasters. You've got good instincts, Ethan told her one dawn after she'd noticed a heifer in distress and called him in time to save both cow and calf. Better than some cowboys I've known. The praise made Clara glow for days. But with spring also came trouble of a different kind. A neighboring rancher named Samuel Briggs had been expanding his operation, and his cattle had started drifting onto Double C land, grazing grass that belonged to Ethan's herd. At first it was occasional, easily managed with a polite conversation and a fence repair. But as April progressed, the incursions became more frequent and more brazen. "Man's testing me," Ethan said one evening, his jaw tight as he surveyed 24 Briggs cattle grazing in the north pasture, "seeing if I'll push back or roll over." "What are you going to do?" Clara asked. She'd ridden out with him to check fence lines, sitting easy in Daisy's saddle now, her confidence growing with each passing week. "Talk to him first. Give him a chance to do right." Ethan's voice was hard. "But if that doesn't work, we'll move to other measures." The conversation with Briggs went poorly. The man was in his 50s, thick-bodied and red-faced, with a reputation for aggressive business practices and a mean streak when drinking. He met Ethan's polite request to keep his cattle on his own land with barely concealed contempt. "Range is open," Briggs said, leaning against his porch rail. "Cattle wander. Can't be expected to police every head." "Your cattle are breaking through repaired fence to get to my grass," Ethan said evenly. "That's not wandering. That's trespass." "Prove it." Briggs smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "And while you're at it, prove you didn't move those fences yourself. Expand your range at my expense." Ethan's hands curled into fists, but his voice remained steady. "I've got survey maps. Property lines are clear." "Maps can be wrong. Or forged." Briggs spat tobacco juice that landed dangerously close to Ethan's boot. "Tell you what, Cole. Seeing as how you're a bachelor trying to run a ranch and raise a little girl all on your own, maybe you're just stretched too thin. Maybe you ought to consider selling. I'd give you a fair price." "The Double C isn't for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price." Briggs's smile turned ugly. "Think about it. A man in your position, fighting to keep a kid the whole territory knows you shouldn't have, trying to manage thousands of acres alone. That's a lot of pressure. Things could get harder for you, or they could get easier. Your choice." The threat was clear. Clara, watching from the wagon, felt ice settle in her stomach, but Ethan's voice never wavered. "Keep your cattle on your land, Briggs. This is your only warning." The ride back to the Double C was tense. Clara could see the anger in Ethan's shoulders, the way his jaw worked as he drove the wagon. "He's trying to intimidate you," she said quietly. "He's succeeding." Ethan's hands tightened on the reins, not because I'm afraid of him, but because he's right about one thing. I am stretched thin. Ranch this size needs more hands than I've got, especially during calving and roundup. And having you to care for takes time. Time I used to spend entirely on ranch work. Claire's chest constricted. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be a burden." "Stop." Ethan pulled the wagon to a halt, turning to face her. "That's not what I meant, and you know it. You're not a burden, Clara. You're my daughter. But the reality is Briggs knows he can apply pressure, and he's going to keep doing it until something breaks. What are we going to do?" "We're going to fight smarter." Ethan clicked to the horses, setting them moving again. "And we're going to ask for help." Help came in the form of the Territorial Land Office, where Ethan filed formal complaints and requested a survey to reestablish property boundaries. It came from Jack, who started writing fence lines daily, documenting every breach and counting every trespassing head. And it came from Martha, who spread word through her network of ranch wives about Briggs's tactics, turning public opinion subtly against him. But Briggs escalated. He hired more hands, rough men with hard eyes, who made a point of riding close to the Double C borders, watching, waiting. Clara felt their eyes on her when she rode out with Ethan, felt the weight of their attention like something physical and threatening. "Stay close to the house when I'm not with you," Ethan instructed. "No riding alone, not even to Martha's." "I mean it, Clara." She obeyed, but the restriction chafed. She'd grown to love her freedom, her ability to ride Daisy across the vast open spaces of the ranch. Being confined felt like losing something precious. Then came the day everything changed. Clara was in the garden with Martha, planting early vegetables, when they heard shouting from the direction of the barn. She looked up to see Jack running toward the house, his face urgent. "Fire!" he yelled. "The North Pasture barn! It's on fire!" Ethan was already moving, grabbing buckets, yelling orders. Clara ran after him, her heart pounding. The North Pasture barn was small, used mainly for equipment storage and shelter during roundups, but it was full of valuable tack and tools. By the time they reached it, flames were already licking through the roof. The structure was old, dry timber that burned fast and hot. Ethan organized a bucket brigade from the creek, But it was clear the barn was lost. The best they could do was keep the fire from spreading to the grass. They fought for 2 hours, choking on smoke, their faces blackened with soot. When the barn finally collapsed in on itself, sending a shower of sparks into the sky, all that remained was a smoldering pile of charred timber and twisted metal. Ethan stood staring at the ruin, his chest heaving. Jack approached, his face grim. "Found this," he said, holding up a kerosene can. "Hidden in the brush about 50 yards back, still half full." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Martha put a protective hand on Clara's shoulder. "Briggs," Ethan said, his voice flat and cold. "Can't prove it," Jack said. "But yeah, I'd bet money on it." They rode to the sheriff's office in Cheyenne the next morning. Sheriff Tom Hendricks was a lean man in his 60s, honest but practical, who listened to their story with a frown. "The kerosene can isn't enough," he said. "Could have been left there by anyone, any time. You got witnesses? Anyone see Briggs or his men near your property yesterday?" "No," Ethan admitted. "But who else would have reason?" "Reason isn't evidence, Cole. I'll ride out, talk to Briggs, let him know I'm watching. But without proof, there's nothing I can charge him with." "So he can burn me out, and you'll do nothing?" Hendricks's expression hardened. "I'll do what the law allows. You want vigilante justice, you're on your own. But that won't end well for anybody, especially not that little girl you're raising." The mention of Clara seemed to deflate some of Ethan's anger. He nodded stiffly and left, Clara trailing behind. On the ride home, Clara finally asked the question that had been building in her chest. "Are we going to lose the ranch?" "No," Ethan said firmly, "but we might have to get creative about defending it." The next week brought a surprise. A group of neighboring ranchers appeared at the Double C, led by a grizzled old cattleman named Henry Price, who owned the spread east of Ethan's property. "Heard about your trouble with Briggs," Price said without preamble. "Heard about the fire, too. We've all had dealings with that man, and none of them pleasant. He's trying to muscle you out, take your land cheap." "I'm not selling," Ethan said. "Didn't figure you were. That's why we're here." Price gestured to the men behind him, 5 ranchers, all solid and serious. "We're proposing a cooperative, all of us together, watching each other's backs. Someone messes with one, they mess with all of us. Briggs is big, but he's not bigger than 6 ranches combined." Ethan studied them, surprise evident on his face. "Why would you do this?" "Because today it's you, tomorrow it could be any of us," another rancher said. "And because what Briggs is doing, the intimidation, the fire, it's not how decent men do business. We draw the line here." Clara watched her father consider the offer, saw something shift in his expression. He'd been alone for so long, used to fighting his battles solo. Accepting help didn't come easy, but finally he extended his hand. "I appreciate it," he said. "More than I can say." The cooperative changed everything. With 6 ranches working together, fence lines were easier to patrol, suspicious activity got reported and investigated, and Briggs found himself facing unified resistance instead of isolated targets. His cattle still wandered occasionally, but the aggressive trespassing stopped. His hired hands no longer rode Double C borders looking for trouble. But the peace was uneasy, and everyone knew it. Briggs wasn't the type to simply give up. The confrontation came in early June at the Territorial Cattlemen's Association meeting in Cheyenne. All the major ranchers attended, including both Ethan and Briggs. Clara waited outside with Martha while the men conducted their business, but she could hear raised voices through the windows. When Ethan emerged 2 hours later, his face was set in hard lines. "What happened?" Clara asked. "Clara, Briggs accused me of fence cutting, trying to turn the association against me." Ethan's voice was tight with controlled fury. "Price and the others backed me up, showed the documentation we've been keeping. Briggs looked like a liar and a bully in front of the whole association." "That's good, isn't it?" "It's good for my reputation, but it's bad for keeping the peace. I humiliated him publicly. A man like that doesn't forgive that." Martha frowned. "You think he'll retaliate?" "I know he will. Question is when and how." They didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Clara was in the barn practicing her rope work when she heard horses approaching fast. She peered out to see Briggs himself riding up with 4 of his hands, all armed. Jack appeared from the bunkhouse, rifle in hand but held low. Can I help you, gentlemen? I'm here to see Cole, Briggs said. Got business to discuss. Ethan emerged from the house, and Clara felt her stomach clench at the tension in his shoulders. She stayed hidden in the barn, watching through a gap in the boards. Briggs, Ethan said evenly, you're on my property uninvited. This won't take long. Briggs's smile was cold. I'm offering you one last chance to sell. Fair price, cash money, enough to set yourself up somewhere else. Maybe somewhere better suited to a man raising a daughter on his own. I've told you before, the double C isn't for sale. See? That's where you're being foolish. Briggs shifted in his saddle. Things have a way of happening on isolated ranches, accidents, fires. A man can lose everything if he's not careful, and a little girl could get hurt if she's in the wrong place at the wrong time. The threat against Clara was unmistakable. Ethan's voice dropped to something dangerous. You just threatened my daughter. I stated a fact. Ranches are dangerous places for children. Everyone knows that. Briggs leaned forward. Sell to me, Cole. Take the money and go somewhere safe. Otherwise, I can't guarantee what might happen. Ethan's hand moved toward the rifle, leaning against the porch rail. But before he could reach it, horses thundered into the yard from 3 different directions. Price and his men, along with 2 other cooperative ranchers, surrounded Briggs and his hands with guns drawn. I believe Mr. Cole asked you to leave his property, Price said calmly. And I believe we all just heard you threaten a child. That's not something we take kindly to in these parts. Briggs's face went red, then white. He was outnumbered and outgunned, and he knew it. This isn't over, he snarled. Yes, it is, Ethan said, his voice like steel. You just made your last mistake, Briggs. You threatened Clara, in front of witnesses. Every man here heard it. You so much as look at her wrong. You so much as ride within sight of my property line again. And I'll see you in jail or in the ground. Your choice. The silence stretched taut as wire. Finally, Briggs yanked his horse around and rode out, his men following. They didn't look back. When the dust settled, Price turned to Ethan. We've been keeping watch, rotating patrols. When we saw him riding in with armed men, we figured it was time to make our presence known. Thank you, Ethan said, and his voice was rough with emotion. All of you, you may have just saved my daughter's life. Clara emerged from the barn, her legs shaking. Ethan pulled her close, his arms tight around her. You're safe, he murmured. I won't let anything happen to you. But that night, Clara had the worst nightmare yet. She woke screaming, tangled in sheets, convinced that flames were consuming the house and Briggs's men were dragging her away. Ethan was there instantly, gathering her into his arms, rocking her like she was small enough to break. He wanted to hurt me, she sobbed, to hurt you through me. I know, but he can't touch you now. Too many witnesses, too much attention. He'd be the first suspect if anything happened. Ethan's voice was fierce. And I'll never let you out of my sight until I'm certain the threat is gone. Over the following weeks, Sheriff Hendricks paid Briggs a visit, making it clear that the threat against Clara had been noted and would be prosecuted if anything happened. The Territorial Land Office completed their survey, establishing beyond doubt that Briggs had been trespassing. Faced with legal action and social censure from the Cattlemen's Association, Briggs finally backed down. Word came through Martha's network that he was selling out, moving his operation to Montana where his reputation hadn't preceded him. The news brought cautious relief to the Double C. It's really over? Clara asked, hardly daring to believe it. Looks like it, Ethan said. Briggs is leaving and good riddance. But Clara, I need you to understand something. This won't be the last fight we face. Ranch life is hard, and there will always be challenges, weather, markets, difficult neighbors, but we'll face them together. Together, Clara echoed, and the word felt like a promise. Summer settled over the ranch like a blessing. The cooperative proved its value beyond just defense, as the ranchers shared resources and labor for branding and roundup. Clara watched her father work alongside his neighbors, saw how the community that had once judged him now accepted him fully, respected him for his integrity and his stubborn defense of his daughter. On her 10th birthday in late February of the following year, with winter snow falling soft outside the windows, Ethan gave Clara an unexpected gift: legal adoption papers, already filed and approved. "You're not just staying here anymore," he said quietly, his gray eyes warm. "You're officially mine. Clara Cole, if you want the name." Clara stared at the papers, at her new name written in official script. Clara Cole, daughter of Ethan Cole. Legal, permanent, unbreakable. "I want it," she whispered. "I want it more than anything." Martha cried. Jack grinned and called her Little Miss Cole until she laughed. And that night, Clara lay in her bed, in her own room, in her own home, and felt something she'd never quite managed to feel before, complete and absolute belonging. She was Clara Cole now. She had a father who'd fought for her, a home that couldn't be taken away, a future that stretched bright and promising before her. The girl who'd stood on that auction platform whispering that no one wanted her was gone, replaced by someone stronger, braver, more certain of her place in the world. Through her window, she could see stars scattered across the black Wyoming sky, the same stars she'd watched that first night. But everything else had changed. She'd changed. And in the room below, she could hear Ethan moving through the house, checking locks and banking fires, his presence a constant reassurance. She was home. She was wanted. She was loved. And nothing, not Mrs. Hartley's judgment, not Briggs's threats, not the world's opinions, could take that away from her now. The years that followed moved with the rhythm of ranch life. Seasons turning, cattle cycling through birth and growth and market, the land demanding its due and giving back in measure. Clara grew from a thin 10-year-old into a sturdy girl of 14, her body filling out with good food and hard work, her face losing its haunted wariness and gaining something fiercer, more confident. She could rope a calf as well as any hand, manage the ranch books with precision that made Ethan shake his head in wonder, and ride Daisy across terrain that would challenge experienced cowboys. Martha's lessons had given her education beyond what most frontier girls received. She could quote Shakespeare and calculate compound interest, discuss history and debate philosophy with the visiting circuit preacher who stopped by quarterly. But more than skills or knowledge, Clara had gained something harder to define. She'd grown into herself, into the space Ethan had given her to become whoever she was meant to be. She spoke her mind clearly, defended her opinions fiercely, and moved through the world with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. The Double C had prospered too. The cooperative Ethan had joined strengthened all their operations, and his careful breeding program had produced cattle that commanded premium prices. The ranch house had been expanded, a proper office added for the increasingly complex bookkeeping, a larger bunkhouse built to accommodate the seasonal hands they now employed. But prosperity brought its own complications, and on a warm May morning just after Clara's 14th birthday, those complications arrived in the form of a letter from Philadelphia. Ethan read it at the breakfast table, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finished, he set it down carefully, as if it might explode. "What is it?" Clara asked, though dread was already coiling in her stomach. "It's from a lawyer representing the estate of Margaret Wynne," Ethan said slowly. "Your mother's sister. She's recently deceased, and apparently left you a small inheritance. But there's a condition. You have to travel to Philadelphia to claim it, and while you're there, they want to discuss your situation." Clara's hand stilled on her coffee cup. "My situation? Living out here, being raised by a bachelor rancher instead of proper family." Ethan's voice carried an edge of old anger. "Seems your aunt had opinions about your placement but never acted on them while she was alive. Now her executor is raising questions." "I don't want an inheritance," Clara said immediately. "I don't need anything from them. They never wanted me when I needed family." "That's your choice to make," Ethan said. "But the lawyer's letter suggests that if we ignore this, they might pursue legal action to review the adoption. Claim that you were coerced, or that I manipulated a child who didn't understand what she was agreeing to." The threat was clear and familiar. After all these years, someone was still trying to question whether Clara belonged at the Double C. Martha, who'd arrived early to help with spring cleaning, was outraged when she heard. Those Philadelphia vultures had their chance when Clara was small and desperate. Now that she's nearly grown and clearly thriving, they want to meddle. "It's unconscionable." "It's legal," Ethan said grimly. "Or at least they can make it legal enough to cause trouble. The adoption's solid, but Clara was 10 when we finalized it. A clever lawyer could argue she was too young to make an informed decision." "So what do we do?" Clara asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Ethan looked at her with those steady gray eyes that had seen her through every crisis. We go to Philadelphia. We face them directly. We show them exactly who you've become and dare them to claim you'd be better off anywhere else. The decision made, preparations began immediately. It would be Clara's first journey beyond the Wyoming territory, her first time on a train since the orphan journey that had brought her west 6 years ago. The prospect was both terrifying and thrilling. "You'll need proper traveling clothes," Martha declared, already making lists, "and city dresses for the meetings. You can't show up looking like a ranch girl, even though that's exactly what you are." "Why not?" Clara challenged. "I am a ranch girl. I'm proud of it." "Because sometimes we have to play the game by their rules to win," Ethan said quietly. "We'll show them you can be everything a proper young lady should be, and more besides. Then they'll have no grounds to question anything." The journey east took 4 days by rail, the landscape transforming from mountains and plains to farmland and cities, the air growing thick and humid as they traveled. Clara sat pressed to the window, watching America unfold in all its vast complexity, Ethan a steady presence beside her. They spoke little during the journey, but their silence was comfortable, companionable. 6 years of shared life had taught them to communicate without words, to read each other's moods and needs. When Clara grew anxious, Ethan's hand would rest briefly on her shoulder. When weariness showed in the lines around his eyes, Clara would suggest they take their dinner in the dining car, giving him a change of scenery. Philadelphia hit Clara like a physical blow. The noise, the crowds, the buildings pressed together, the smell of coal smoke and horses, and too many people in too little space. She remembered fragments of the city from her orphanage days, but then she'd been too small and scared to really see it. Now at 14 and accustomed to Wyoming's vast spaces, the city felt suffocating. "Stay close," Ethan murmured, his hand protective at her back as they navigated the station. "City's different from what you're used to." They took rooms at a modest hotel, and that evening met with Thomas Webb, who traveled from Cheyenne to represent them at the meeting. His presence was reassuring, a piece of home in this foreign place. "The executor is a man named Charles Pemberton," Webb explained over dinner. "Prominent lawyer, social climber, very concerned with propriety. Your Aunt Margaret was a wealthy widow with no children of her own. The inheritance she left Clara is modest, about $500 and some jewelry, but Pemberton seems to think he's also been charged with ensuring Clara's welfare." "Based on what authority?" Ethan asked. "Family connection, however distant, and unfortunately, the fact that you're still technically just her adoptive father, not blood kin." Webb's expression was serious. "They may try to argue that now that Clara's approaching womanhood, she needs female guidance that you can't provide, that the inheritance should be used to place her in a finishing school or with a proper family." Clara's appetite vanished. "They can't do that. The adoption is legal." "It is," Webb assured her, "but they can make things difficult. The best strategy is to show them that you're well-adjusted, educated, and happy, that removing you from Ethan's care would be harmful, not helpful." The meeting was scheduled for the next afternoon at Pemberton's office, a grand building in the heart of the city with marble floors and dark wood paneling. Clara wore her finest dress, deep green wool that Martha had made specially, with a high collar and neat buttons that spoke of propriety and good upbringing. She'd pinned her hair up in the style Martha had taught her, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw not a frightened orphan, but a poised young woman. But her hands still shook as they entered Pemberton's office. The lawyer was in his 50s, thin and austere, with steel-rimmed spectacles and an expression of permanent disapproval. He looked up when they entered, his gaze sweeping over Clara with clinical assessment. "Miss Wynne," he said, not rising, "and Mr. Cole, please sit." "It's Clara Cole now," Clara said clearly, before Ethan could speak. "I was legally adopted 4 years ago." Pemberton's eyebrows rose. "Ah, yes, the adoption. We'll discuss that shortly." He shuffled papers on his desk. "First, let me express condolences on your Aunt Margaret's passing. She was a fine woman, very concerned with propriety and family duty." "She never contacted me," Clara said. "Not once in 6 years." "But your aunt believed you were being cared for by the Sisters of Mercy," Pemberton said stiffly. "She was not aware of your irregular placement until quite recently. When she learned the details, she was deeply troubled." Troubled enough to leave Clara an inheritance, Ethan observed, but not troubled enough to actually meet her or inquire about her welfare. Pemberton's mouth thinned. Your aunt was elderly and ill. Travel was impossible, but she charged me as executor of her estate with ensuring Clara's well-being and future prospects, which brings us to the matter at hand. He pulled out a document and began reading. Margaret Wynne left to her niece, Clara Wynne, the sum of $500 and various items of jewelry to be held in trust until Clara reaches the age of 18 or marries, whichever comes first. Additionally, she expressed her wish that Clara receive proper education and female guidance befitting a young lady of good family. I'm receiving excellent education, Clara said. Mrs. Hayes has been tutoring me for years. I can read Latin, calculate advanced mathematics, and discuss literature and history with anyone. Ranch wife tutoring is hardly equivalent to a proper finishing school, Pemberton said dismissively. And that brings us to the proposal. Your aunt's inheritance, combined with the trust I've been authorized to establish, would be sufficient to place you in the Willowbrook Academy for Young Ladies, an excellent institution where you could receive the polish and connections necessary for a suitable marriage. Clara felt anger rising hot in her chest. I don't need polish. I need to learn ranch management and business accounting. And I'm 14. I'm not thinking about marriage. Every young lady should be thinking about her future, Pemberton said. And yours, I'm afraid, is rather limited in your current situation. A ranch is no place for a young woman to grow up, especially under the guardianship of an unmarried man. The impropriety becomes more pronounced as you mature. The only thing improper here is you trying to separate a daughter from her father, Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. Clara is thriving. She's healthy, educated, happy, and confident. What exactly do you think a finishing school would give her that she doesn't already have? Refinement, Pemberton said. Social graces, connections to good families, a path to respectable marriage, and security. I have security, Clara said. I have a home and a father who loves me and a future managing one of the most successful ranches in Wyoming Territory. That's more than most girls have. Pemberton looked at her with something like pity. My dear child, you've been isolated so long you don't understand what you're missing. The ranch may seem exciting now, but what happens when you're 20, 25, 30? Will you still be keeping your father's books and riding horses? Or will you regret the opportunities you missed? You're talking about opportunities I never asked for, Clara shot back. I was 8 years old standing on an auction platform while people like you walked away because I wasn't worth the trouble. Ethan chose me when no one else would. He gave me a home, a family, a purpose. And you think I should throw that away for etiquette lessons and husband hunting? I think, Pemberton said coldly, that you're too young to understand the implications of your situation, which is why I've filed a petition with the court to review the adoption and consider alternative placements more suitable for a young woman of your age and prospects. The words fell like stones into deep water. Webb leaned forward immediately. On what grounds? He demanded. On the grounds that a 14-year-old girl living alone with a bachelor rancher is inappropriate, regardless of legal adoption. On the grounds that Clara's educational and social development is being neglected in favor of manual labor. And on the grounds that she was only 10 years old when the adoption was finalized, too young to truly consent to such a permanent arrangement. Clara felt the room spinning. After everything, after the first court battle, after years of monthly inspections, after building a life and a family, they were going to tear it all apart again. Ethan's hand found hers under the table, steady and warm. Clara consented at 10, and she consents now at 14. Let's ask her directly, in front of witnesses. Clara, do you want to be removed from my care and placed in a finishing school? No, Clara said, her voice shaking but clear. Never. Do you feel you've been harmed or neglected in any way? No. I feel loved and valued and safe. I feel like I finally found where I belong. That's coercion, Pemberton said. She's been isolated, taught to be dependent on you. Of course, she'd say whatever you want to hear. I'm saying what's true, Clara said fiercely. And I'm not some helpless child who can't think for herself. I know what my life was like before Ethan, and I know what it's like now. I choose now. I choose him. I choose the double C. Pemberton stood. The court will make that determination, The hearing is scheduled for next week. I suggest you use the time to consider whether fighting this is truly in Clara's best interest, Mr. Cole. A young woman needs more than you can provide, no matter how well-intentioned you might be. Outside, on the street with city noise pressing in from all sides, Clara finally let the tears come. Ethan pulled her into an alley, away from curious eyes, and let her cry against his chest. "I can't do this again," she sobbed. "I can't stand in another courtroom and beg to be allowed to keep my own life." "I know," Ethan said, his voice rough, "but we're going to fight, same as before. And we're going to win." Webb joined them, his expression grim. "This is more serious than the Hartley petition. Pemberton has resources and connections. He's already convinced a judge to grant the review hearing. We need a strong defense." Over the next week, they built their case. Webb gathered testimonials from the Wyoming territorial officials, from the monthly inspectors who'd found nothing amiss, from Martha and Jack and the neighboring ranchers who'd witnessed Clara's growth. They compiled Clara's educational achievements, her mastery of ranch accounting, her capabilities that went far beyond what most finishing school graduates could claim. But Pemberton built his case too. He found a doctor willing to testify that adolescent girls required female guidance for proper development. He found a former governess who spoke eloquently about the importance of refined education for young ladies. He even tracked down one of Clara's former foster families, who testified that she'd been a difficult, withdrawn child, evidence, Pemberton argued, of ongoing trauma that Ethan's rough ranch life had failed to address. The hearing took place in a grand courtroom that made the territorial courthouse in Cheyenne look shabby. Judge Harrison was a stern man in his 60s, known for conservative views on family structure and women's roles. Clara's heart sank when she saw him. Pemberton's opening statement painted a picture of a vulnerable girl denied her rightful place in society, isolated on a remote ranch, deprived of feminine influence and proper education. He made Ethan sound like a well-meaning but ultimately unsuitable guardian, someone whose love for Clara blinded him to what she truly needed. Webb countered with facts: Clara's test scores that exceeded those of most finishing school students, her business acumen in managing complex ranch accounts, her physical health and emotional stability. He called Martha to testify about Clara's education and character development. "She's the most well-adjusted young woman I've ever taught," Martha said firmly. "Confident without being brash, intelligent without being arrogant, capable of both hard work and intellectual pursuit. Show me a finishing school graduate who can quote Virgil while delivering a calf, and I'll show you someone half as remarkable as Clara Cole." But when Pemberton cross-examined her, he focused on the gaps. Does she know how to plan a formal dinner party, navigate society politics, present herself in refined company? "She knows how to be honest, capable, and kind," Martha shot back. "Those virtues matter more than which fork to use." "Not in the world she'll have to navigate," Pemberton said smoothly. They called Clara to testify on the second day. She wore her green dress again, her hair pinned up, her hands clasped to keep them from shaking. Judge Harrison looked down at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Miss Cole?" he said. "Or do you prefer Miss Wynne?" "Cole," Clara said firmly. "Clara Cole. That's my legal name, and it's who I am." "Tell me about your life on the ranch, your typical day." Clara took a breath and spoke from the heart. She described mornings helping Ethan with livestock, afternoons studying with Martha or working on the ranch books, evenings reading or practicing skills she'd need to eventually manage the double C on her own. She talked about learning to identify sick cattle, to project market trends, to negotiate with buyers. She spoke of riding across vast grasslands under endless sky, of understanding the rhythm of seasons and the satisfaction of hard work well done. "And you don't feel you're missing anything?" the judge asked. "I'm missing pretense," Clara said. "I'm missing the chance to learn needless etiquette rules and superficial social games, but I'm gaining real skills, real knowledge, and real purpose. I know who I am and what I'm capable of." How many finishing school girls can say the same? Pemberton stood. "Miss Cole, isn't it true that you have no female friends your own age? That you're isolated from normal social interaction?" "I have Martha, who's more like a mother to me than any biological relation ever was. I have the ranchers' daughters I see at association gatherings. And I have myself. I learned early that being alone isn't the same as being lonely." "But don't you want what other girls want? pretty dresses, social events, the chance to meet suitable young men? I have pretty dresses when I want them. As for suitable young men, I'm 14. I have years to think about that. And when I do, I'll want someone who values my mind and capabilities, not just my social polish. You're very articulate for a ranch-raised girl, Pemberton said, and his tone made it sound like an accusation. I'm articulate because I've been well-educated and encouraged to think for myself, Clara said. Being raised on a ranch didn't make me ignorant. It made me capable. On the third day, Ethan took the stand. Under Webb's questioning, he laid out exactly what he'd provided Clara: safety, education, purpose, and unconditional love. He spoke about the monthly inspections that had never found fault, about Clara's growth from traumatized child to confident young woman, about the future he was building for her as eventual co-owner and manager of the Double C. But Pemberton's cross-examination was brutal. He hammered on Ethan's bachelor status, his lack of experience with raising girls, the impropriety of their living arrangement as Clara matured. He insinuated, without quite stating, that there was something unwholesome about a man choosing to raise a daughter alone. Mr. Cole, isn't it true that you've never married? Pemberton asked. Yes? And you have no plans to marry? No current plans, no. So Clara will continue living alone with you, an unmarried man, as she grows into womanhood. You don't see any impropriety in that. Ethan's jaw tightened. I see a father raising his daughter. If you see something else, that says more about you than it does about me. You claim to be her father, but you're not her father. You're a stranger who bought her at an auction and convinced a territorial court to let you keep her. I'm the man who saw a child in need and chose to help her. I'm the man who spent 6 years making sure she knows she's valued and loved. I'm the man who'll spend the rest of my life making sure she has every opportunity to become whoever she wants to be. That makes me her father in every way that matters. The courtroom was silent. Even Pemberton seemed momentarily at a loss. Judge Harrison called for closing arguments. Pemberton spoke first, painting a picture of Clara's limited future on the ranch, her lack of refinement and social prospects, the impropriety of her situation. He argued that the inheritance gave the court an opportunity to correct a well-meaning but ultimately unsuitable placement, to give Clara the life her aunt had wanted for her. Webb's closing was passionate. Your Honor, this case isn't about what's proper, it's about what's right. Clara Cole, and yes, that's her legal name, earned through years of love and family, has thrived under her father's care. She's educated, healthy, confident, and happy. She has skills most young women never gain, and opportunities most can only dream of. Mr. Pemberton wants to take all that away and replace it with a finishing school education that will prepare her for a life she doesn't want and has never asked for. This court must ask itself, who are we serving here? Some abstract notion of propriety? Or a real girl with real needs who has found real family? He paused, letting the words settle. Clara stood on an auction platform 6 years ago and said, "No one wants me." Ethan Cole proved her wrong. He wanted her. He chose her. He built a family with her. And now Mr. Pemberton wants to tear that family apart because it doesn't fit his narrow definition of acceptable. Don't let him do it, Your Honor. Don't tell this girl that love and family only count when they look a certain way. Judge Harrison called for recess to consider his decision. The wait was agony. Clara sat between Ethan and Webb in the hallway, her stomach churning, her hands ice cold despite the summer heat. Ethan held her hand, his thumb moving in slow circles against her palm, the same gesture he'd used to calm her through nightmares 6 years ago. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "I want you to know something. These 6 years with you have been the best of my life. You gave me purpose and joy I didn't know I was missing. If the worst happens and they take you away, I'll fight to get you back the moment you turn 18. But if they force you to stay in Philadelphia until then, I want you to remember, you're my daughter, always. Nothing can change that." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You're my father. The only one I've ever had or ever wanted." An hour later, they were called back into the courtroom. Judge Harrison sat at his bench, his expression unreadable. Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone must hear it. "I've given this matter considerable thought," the judge began. "The question before this court is not whether Mr. Cole has provided adequate care. The evidence is clear that he has. The question is whether adequate is sufficient or whether Clara's welfare demands something more. Clara felt her world tilting. I've listened to testimony about propriety, about social development, about the importance of female influence. These are not trivial concerns. Society has expectations for young women, and Clara's current situation defies many of those expectations. He paused. However, this court must weigh social convention against Clara's demonstrated well-being, and the evidence is overwhelming that Clara is not merely adequately cared for. She is thriving in ways that most children, raised in the most conventional circumstances, do not achieve. Hope flared in Clara's chest. Clara Cole is articulate, educated, capable, and remarkably mature for her age. She knows her own mind and speaks it clearly. She has skills that will serve her regardless of the path she chooses in life. Most importantly, she has a father who demonstrably loves her and has made enormous sacrifices to provide for her welfare. Judge Harrison looked directly at Clara. Miss Cole, you have expressed your wishes clearly and consistently. You are old enough now that this court must give considerable weight to your own choice in the matter. He turned to Pemberton. Mr. Pemberton, your concerns about propriety are noted. However, propriety must serve the child, not the reverse. I find no evidence that Clara's current placement is harmful to her. Quite the opposite. I find that she has benefited enormously from it. The gavel came down. The petition to review the adoption is denied. Clara Cole will remain in the custody of her adoptive father, Ethan Cole. The inheritance will be held in trust, as Margaret Wynne specified, but there will be no further court interference in this family. Case dismissed. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then Ethan's arms were around her, and she was laughing and crying at once, and Webb was shaking Ethan's hand, and Martha, who'd been sitting in the gallery, was wiping her eyes. They'd won. Against Philadelphia lawyers and social convention and every expectation of how families should look, they'd won. Outside the courthouse, in the summer sunshine, Clara turned to Ethan. Can we go home now? Yes, Ethan said, and his smile was brighter than she'd ever seen it. Let's go home. The train journey back to Wyoming felt different, lighter, freer, triumphant. Clara pressed her face to the window and watched Philadelphia disappear behind them, felt the landscape open up as they traveled west. With each mile, she felt more like herself. When they finally rolled into Cheyenne 4 days later, Martha and Jack were waiting at the station with the wagon. The reunion was joyful, everyone talking at once, relief and celebration mixed together. The ride up to the Double C was quiet, but it was the comfortable quiet of people who didn't need words. Clara watched the familiar landscape unfold, the rolling grasslands, the pine-covered hills, the mountains rising purple in the distance. When the ranch house came into view, nestled against the hillside with smoke rising from the chimney, her throat tightened with emotion. "Home," she whispered. "Home," Ethan agreed. That night, after Martha and Jack had left and the house was quiet, Clara sat with Ethan on the porch as they'd done countless times before. Stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere a coyote called. The air smelled of sage and pine and the coming summer. "Father," Clara said, still savoring the word, "what happens now?" "Now you grow up," Ethan said simply. "You finish your education, you learn everything you need to know to run this ranch. And when you're ready, you decide what kind of life you want. Maybe you'll stay here and manage the Double C with me. Maybe you'll go to university and study something that interests you. Maybe you'll travel or marry or build something entirely new. Whatever you choose, you'll have the foundation to do it well." "I want to stay," Clara said. "I want to learn everything about ranching and eventually take over managing the Double C so you can rest." Ethan chuckled. "I'm not ready to rest yet, but I like knowing the ranch will be in good hands when the time comes." They sat in comfortable silence, father and daughter, watching the stars. Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, the auction platform, the terror of being unwanted, the slow building of trust and family. She thought about all the battles they'd fought to stay together, all the people who'd tried to tear them apart based on nothing more than how things looked from the outside. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking me in? All the trouble it's caused?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I regret every moment before I met you because those were years I wasted being alone when I could have been building a family. You didn't cause trouble, Clara. You caused life. You made everything mean something. Clara leaned against his shoulder, feeling his solid warmth, his steadfast presence. I love you, Father. I love you too, daughter. The years that followed were good ones. Clara grew into a capable young woman, managing ranch operations with skill that impressed even the most skeptical cattlemen. She took courses in business and agriculture, attended Cattlemen's Association meetings, and eventually became one of the youngest ranch managers in the territory. When Wyoming achieved statehood, Clara was 19, confident and competent, with a reputation for fair dealing and sharp business sense. The Double C prospered under her management, and Ethan, now in his 50s, gradually stepped back, content to let his daughter lead while he handled the physical work he still loved. Suitors came, of course, young ranchers and businessmen drawn by Clara's capabilities as much as her property. But Clara was particular. She'd learned from Ethan that love meant choosing someone who saw you clearly and valued you completely. She wouldn't settle for less. When she finally did marry, at 23, it was to a veterinarian named Daniel Matthews who respected her skills and shared her vision for the ranch's future. Ethan walked her down the aisle at the church in Cheyenne, and when he placed her hand in Daniel's, his eyes were wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. Take care of her, he told Daniel. I will, Daniel promised. But honestly, sir, I think she's more likely to take care of me. Ethan laughed, and Clara kissed his cheek, and the celebration that followed brought together 6 years of community. The neighboring ranchers, Martha and Jack, even some of the territorial officials who'd monitored Clara's placement and watched her thrive. Clara and Daniel built a house on Double C land, close enough to the main house that Ethan could walk over for breakfast every morning. Children came, 2 daughters and a son, and Ethan became the grandfather he'd never imagined being, teaching his grandchildren to ride and rope and love the land. The ranch continued to prosper, expanding to 7,000 acres, becoming one of the premier cattle operations in the state. Clara and Daniel ran it together, partners in business as in life, while Ethan took pleasure in watching his family grow. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Ethan would stand on the porch of the house he'd built all those years ago and think about the scared 8-year-old who'd stood on an auction platform whispering that no one wanted her. He'd think about the choice he'd made that day, the choice that had changed both their lives completely. He'd made many good decisions in his life, built a successful ranch, earned respect in his community, contributed to the territory's growth. But his best decision, the one that mattered most, was the moment he'd raised his hand and bid on a frightened child who needed someone to choose her. She'd been worth everything. Every fight, every judgment, every moment of doubt. She'd given his life meaning and purpose, had transformed a lonely house into a home, had proven that family wasn't about blood or convention, but about choice and commitment. Years later, when Ethan was old and his hands shook too much to manage a rope, he sat on that same porch with Clara, now a woman of 40 with silver threading through her dark hair, and watched her children play in the yard. Did I ever thank you, Clara asked. Properly, I mean, for choosing me that day. Ethan smiled. Every day of your life, just by being who you are. I was so scared, Clara remembered. I thought my life was over, that I'd never matter to anyone. You always mattered, Ethan said. You just needed someone to see it. You saw it when no one else would. I saw a brave girl who spoke the truth even when it hurt. I saw someone worth choosing. He looked at her with those steady gray eyes that had seen her through every crisis, every joy, every ordinary day. Best choice I ever made. Clara took his weathered hand in hers, feeling the calluses from decades of ranch work, the strength that had built everything she knew. Mine too, she said, choosing you back, choosing this life, choosing to believe I could be wanted. They sat together as the sun set over the Wyoming landscape they both loved, father and daughter. Their bond forged not from blood but from something stronger, choice, commitment, and love that had weathered every storm. The girl no one chose had become a woman who chose herself, who built a life of purpose and meaning, who passed on to her own children the lesson Ethan had taught her, that family isn't something you're born into, but something you create through daily choice and steadfast love. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the thriving ranch or the successful business or the respect of the community, but the simple truth that choosing to love someone, to commit to them completely despite what the world might say, could change everything. Ethan had chosen Clara when no one wanted her, and Clara had chosen him back, creating a family that proved love was stronger than blood, that belonging was built, not given, and that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose for ourselves. As darkness settled over the Double C Ranch, as the stars emerged one by one in the vast Wyoming sky, Clara sat with her father and felt complete. She'd traveled far from that auction platform, from the frightened child who believed she was worthless. She'd become someone strong and capable and loved, someone who knew her worth and lived her purpose. And it all began with one man who looked at a scared little girl and saw not a burden, but a daughter, who chose her when no one else would and changed both their lives forever.